All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Behind the Back podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Marcos Codenegron. Beside me here, as always, is Ben, the Jet Reds. Ben, how are you today, my brother?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. Now it's officially the off season, so let's start. Let's start our topics today with the finals, where obviously the Celtics 1-5, and when I guess for me, was there really any surprises to you the whole time?
No, not at all. I the surprising part for me was actually how tricked I was by the media and this whole narrative that, they always push going into every finals, and that's that it's going to be a lot closer, than everybody thinks and blah blah blah. Like when it first happened, I was super hyped and I was like, "Oh man, this is going to be a 7-game series." Everybody thought this. And then we saw game 1 and we're like, "Oh crap, this might not be 7. It could be like, 6." No, it went 5. And honestly, by the end, we find ourselves not that surprised.
Yeah, I think the most surprising thing that people are going to take away was the Mavs were close. They had opportunities, especially in game 3. And I think the thing that's going to stick out the most was the image of Luka complaining and not getting back and allowing the Celtics to kind of live in his head. And when he focuses on the refs, it really cost him not just that game, and he fouled out at the end of that game in game 3. It just like that was the game where the Mavericks had their best chance to kind of set the tone, and then they went down 0-3 instead.
Yeah, and I kind of touched on that earlier in the playoffs with his attitude. Like that was one of the reasons he wasn't one of my favorite players and in my opinion one of the best players at that time. It's just that his attitude, it reminds me a lot of Boogie, because like Boogie's thing for the longest time wasn't just that he was in Sacramento, but everybody talked about his attitude being terrible. And that starts to have more of a narrative pushed on you than any kind of play. And I mean, even LeBron, like some of the, like the crying stuff that fans and media pushes towards LeBron, it's like that is so much lesser to what his actual skills are in the NBA, but it's always, it's always the narrative. It seems like more often than not, when you talk about LeBron, it's that he flops, it's that he cries, like, and that's an unfortunate route that we're finding Luka going on. And it's unfortunate because he's super skilled, and it's frustrating to see somebody with his skill set just continue to get beat by himself mentally.
Yeah, and who knows, like the way they approached game 4 where they routed them, obviously that was partially a case of the Celtics kind of saying, you know what, we will win at home. Let's take it back and test our luck because we can. And but the way that Luka and Kyrie especially played in game 4, they had a better attitude. They weren't focused on the little things in terms of how the refs were bugging them. They were focused on the little details within the game. And that was the biggest difference that we saw, was the level of effort they were putting in. And had they just done that the entire series instead of worrying about the refs, it could have been a different series.
Yeah, I mean, that's looking at the other side. The Celtics are completely they're so well put together, well built. They're a well-oiled machine going into the playoffs, going into the season. And for almost 100 games, they were the best team in the league, and that's really, I can't say uncommon for the team who wins the finals to be the best team all year, but in the fashion that the Celtics did it, because nobody ever expected the Celtics to continue to be the best team and then to win the championship, because we've seen the Celtics knock on the door for how many years now and not, break that barrier down. And so you never expected them to actually get on the stage and do anything with it. But they really, like, they put their nose down, they put their head down, like they took care of business in this series. And it really put it in perspective for me how young the Mavericks are. And I mean, that's kind of from top to bottom. I mean, even Kyrie, he's not that old. He's still playing like he's in his 20s,
Yeah.
And he's early 30s. I think he's 32, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And so there was a lack of coaching experience there, even though Kid's been a coach for years now. But he hadn't been on that stage like that. and at least in a situation like that. And he was faced with a lot of situations where, uh, he just didn't perform the way he should have. And a lot of these guys, Derek Lively, super young, Hardy, really young, Luca, this is his first, final stage. Like this was a growing year for Dallas, and for them to get to the championship, like they should be looking at that as an ultimate success. Like you didn't expect to be in the finals in February, in January, and there you were in the finals. And that's experience that you've just given this extremely young team that a lot of guys in the league don't even get the chance to.
Yeah, and when you look at Luka specifically, and this is being his first finals, he's still only 25 years old. And LeBron's first finals, he was terrible. Kobe's first finals, he was terrible. It's more Larry Bird, he was terrible. Like, it's more common than it is to, like, not succeed in your first series. But Luka still played pretty well, and he still averaged around like 29 points, and he was, 29, 6, and 5 in that range. And he was tasked with trying to carry this team because what got them through this entire playoff field was Derrick Jones Jr. and PJ Washington hitting shots they weren't supposed to the whole time. And everybody, Kyrie included, went cold in this series, and that made the biggest difference. Luka could only do so much. I think they were picking on his defense so much,
Yep.
but in reality, the Mavs could hardly ever push 100, and that was a product of their offense being bad.
It's not a product of their offense. It's a product of Kyrie. And that's the biggest problem. Like Kyrie in this series was terrible.
Yeah.
Flat out terrible. You didn't show up at all in Boston for any of those games, not one of them. And if you showed up for one of them, you might have actually snuck out a win, because like at times it seemed like all the Mavs needed to do was stop some bleeding and get a couple buckets, and then they're back in the game.
Mhm.
Because we've seen them do that for the majority of the season and even the playoffs. Like things would kind of get out of hand for them leading up to the finals, and they would reel it back in with a couple timely buckets from Luka or from Kyrie. Like you had guys to lean on like that. But in this series in the finals, it was just Luka. Nobody else could do anything for the vast majority of it. And it's tough.
And and again, we've touched on this a few times. That's why the Boston Celtics are built so well, because if they were the first team since the 04 Pistons to have a finals where they had, I think, all 5 starters average 10 or more points. And that's like, it just goes to show that there were, especially game 4, Jalen Brown had 10 points, Jason Tatum had 15. Like everybody can struggle at times. Like one person, 2 people can struggle, but because you have 3 other dudes who can pick you up, and Boston was able to rely on so many different ways to attack, especially when their shots weren't falling. They weren't shooting that well compared to the regular season to how they were shooting. So, and it finally kind of started to seem like they were going in on game 5. Like everything was going their way on game 5.
Yeah, it definitely was. So as a result, obviously the Celtics won the championship, and as I called, Jalen Brown won Finals MVP.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you, so obviously Jason Tatum averaged more points, like more rebounds, more assists, just on worse shooting than Jalen Brown. Jalen Brown was a little less in all those, and his efficiency was up. But on the other side of the ball, he was a monster defensively, and he got timely stops, timely buckets. I mean, he showed that leadership that we talked about, the last couple of weeks. With that being said, do you think Jason Tatum was robbed?
No, I don't think he was robbed. I think Jalen Brown was the most deserving. I think scoring-wise, Brown only averaged 1 less point than Tatum. And I think Tatum played really well game 3, and he played really, really well game 5, where he had 30 in both of those games. And I'll give him credit. Like last night game 5, he played great. And, 31 points, 11 assists. Like he did a really good job, and he was hitting tough shots. He was hitting the shots that he's been missing all series. But he's been a good teammate and a good team player throughout this whole process, knowing that he hasn't been shooting that well, but he's been contributing in other ways. But Jalen Brown, especially in game 1 and game 2, was the most consistent player on the team. And I think in those games where they needed to separate themselves early on, and in Game 3, Jaylen Brown was either top 1 or top 2 in each of those games. And I find that his consistency throughout the stages where the games could have tilted the balance either way versus Game 5. Like Game 5, yeah, that's a great closeout game, and Tatum did play better, but I just think Brown's consistency early on carried them to win this.
Yeah, and I fully agree with that. This series, I also kind of realized something. I talked about a couple weeks ago how I can see a scenario play out, win or lose, where the Celtics just hold on to Jaylen Brown and move on from Jason Tatum.
Mm-hmm.
Um, After watching this finals, and obviously there's a high that they're on right now. The Celtics team is on, but riding that high, there were some good things that came out. Just between Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, just talking about each other and their impacts and how they're not focused on what's being said. Like so many reports come out where team dinners and stuff will be happening, and families will like make a comment saying, oh, this guy thinks that Jaylen Brown's better than you, like, and talking to Jason Tatum, and Tatum's like, I don't hear that racket anymore. You know what I mean? And it's like, that is super promising if you're the Celtics fans, like if you're involved in any way, shape, or form, because look, it was kind of like going into the season as the Mavericks. You were like, okay, we're building around Kyrie and Luka. And then, obviously it kind of faded out, and then it was just Luka. And obviously you still build around Luka. And there were other teams like that too, where you have two guys or Minnesota is a great example, where they have one guy to really build around now, and that's Anthony Edwards, right? But going into the season, you had two and maybe three, but really two, Karl Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards. Well, Celtics actually have two to build around. So yeah, you can make a choice and build around one or the other, but you've also got this amazing scenario where you have no expiring deals, contract going into next year. You're coming off the high of a championship, which is always great. And with exception of one guy who has really just battled injuries his whole career, you were relatively healthy the majority of the year.
Yes.
And they're in a great spot, man.
Yeah, all those players are under contract for next year, like their whole rotation. So and I mentioned this when they were in the Final Four, like out of the Final Four teams, I saw that like had the ability to repeat. I thought Boston had the best chance, and they're going to get that level of respect going into next season because of that.
Yeah.
And although it was, it's a mixture of not just their injury history and injury luck, it's the injury luck that other teams had. Their entire path had to deal with injuries from the opposing team's best player, and that was out of their control. They just played who was in front of them, and I think everything that like needs to happen in a season for your season to be the best, it happened for Boston. Like they stayed healthy, teams around them got hurt, and they just took care of business where it mattered most.
Yeah, and it would be a way worse situation if they didn't take care of business and there were all these, different scenarios that played out where it's like, well, really, you still couldn't win. So it's
Exactly.
like, you just can't keep using these excuses for the Celtics. You just got to give them their flowers this year. They were the best team all season long. They proved it in the regular season, in the playoffs, and in the finals. And shout out to the Celtics. It was a fun basketball year.
Crazy one.
Yeah, a crazy one, definitely. But ready to put this year behind us and move on to the offseason here pretty soon. So I'm just a little nervous because obviously we're going to talk about the NBA draft next week, which is a week from today as we record.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't really know what we're going to do with that 13th pick of ours as Kings fans. So we'll get into that next week. But wrapping up the season, man, we are officially in off-season mode.
Yes, and with off-season mode, they changed the rules for free agency in terms of how teams can communicate with players. So for us Kings fans, we're obviously waiting any sort of news on Malik Monk, and if the Kings made their offer to him already, which they probably have, let's be honest, but like any communication that normally would have happened on June 30th can now happen today, and we can find out news. at any point for any signings for teams. So it's going to be stressful, not only going into draft week, especially it would be nice to know what's going on with Malik prior to the draft, so then we have a strategy to approach. So that's what scares me, is that hopefully we don't delay too much.
Yeah, and hopefully we don't pull a Niners, right? But I gotta say I'm nervous because I know you saw the post this morning. I saw the post. Malik posted on his Instagram just a little photo, like a collage of photos, and the caption was, hinting at something about a rocket with some rocket emojis. And I'm not saying that he's going to the Houston Rockets, but when you're talking about re-signing a guy like that, and he's posting emojis and things that indicate a different team or a different scenario, it's worrisome, man. Especially because we don't want to talk about life without Malik.
Yeah, exactly. And again, he has the luxury of signing wherever and however he wants because he's earned it. I think the way he's been able to ascend into the kind of player that he is, he deserves all the opportunity in the world, and I wouldn't blame him. Just sucks that we're in that scenario, and that's just something that we can't predict. So hopefully, we're just in a position where he wants to stay home for at least another 4 more years. So we'll see. Yeah, so we'll talk any potential draft picks we're interested in and trade targets that we're looking for next week. Like Ben said, we'll do it the day before the draft, so then we just kind of have an idea of what news we might have heard and who we're actually interested in and what scenarios we could see playing out.
Yeah, it's going to be a juicy one, guys, so stay tuned.
Absolutely. All right. We'll take a quick second here. We're going to be talking some football with some Niners and some Eagles from what we heard in the offseason. So we'll be right back. All right. We are back. So let's discuss Niners first, because I think the most interesting news is coming out of the Niners camp right now. So I'm going to let you take it away and describe all the peacefulness that's been going around the Niners minicamp and OTAs, huh?
Yeah, peacefulness is never a way to describe the Niners in any way, shape, or form that they do business. So let's get that out of there and throw it in the garbage. Now, I will focus real quick on the Niners OTAs and the mini camps. From what I have read and heard, everything went really well. Just a couple highlights. One in particular is obviously Ricky Pearsall, who I'm hyper focused on, considering we took him as early as we did. Things have looked really good for him. He's really good with his feet. He's making some catches that he shouldn't be making, and he's showing that knack to want to learn the playbook inside and out as soon as possible. And obviously, we talk about what the top teams in football do. Obviously, between our two teams, like, these guys have to be invested in that way to have a successful ball club. And so when we take a guy in the first round like that, I would hope that the things that I'm hearing are actually coming to fruition. So yeah. As far as things are going with him, everything sounds really good. He's been working out. He's been looking quick. He's everything that they have pictured him to be so far. So that's all great. As far as our quarterback, I'm talking Brock Purdy.
Yes, sir.
This man actually has an offseason to work on himself, not just recover from an insane injury. And pictures and videos have come out, and the dude is he's bulked, man. He got big.
For sure.
And I'm stoked about it. Like, it's to be able to have an offseason where instead of recovering, you're actually working on yourself, working on your body, and just getting better at ball. That's kind of scary, considering what Purdy did without any work in the offseason last year. He's been working out with Caleb Williams, who's a recent draft pick for the Bears, and Anthony Richardson, who was rookie for the Colts last year. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's cool to see, man. I'm stoked. It makes me excited. The Niners wouldn't invest in a guy if he wasn't working on himself the way that a lot of these guys are. And a lot of these guys do. And whenever a Niners season starts, I can always count on the top players putting in that insane amount of work get their bodies right, to get their minds right, going into a 17, 18 week long football season, but it's mentally and physically just devouring. Like it takes everything out of you. And so everything so far has been really good. Obviously, Brandon Aiyuk still doesn't have a contract, so he hasn't been working out with the 49ers. He's been posting some plays and stuff, or some videos where he's been doing some like solo workouts, and he looks great because it's Brandon Aiyuk, but we don't have a contract yet. And it's, if I had to scale it, 1 being I'm not so worried, and 10 being I'm really, really worried, I'd say right now I'm floating about a 5, because this is still how the Niners do business. I'm used to no contract being in place in the month of June. Okay. And I'm used to wide receivers for the 49ers playing the negotiation game this way. Now, something surfaced at the start of this week, Marcos. Do you want to talk about that for a sec?
Sure, I'll intro it. So basically, and because I was the one in our group chat who did the whole overreaction to it first, because I was curious. So there was a report when I read the original caption, it was from Fox Sports. It said, "Oh, Brandon Aiyuk, quotation marks, they don't want me here anymore, I swear." And I was like, what? So then they posted a video. I didn't check the video. I just sent the article to Ben and Ryan, and I was like, "Oh, did you guys see this?" And then Ben was like, "You should watch the video." And I watched the video, and it was coming from Brandon Ayuk's house. I believe his lady was recording him having a FaceTime conversation with Jaden Daniels, his former Arizona State teammate way back when, and second pick for the Commanders this year. And it's when you watch it, you see the level of scripted that it really is, because now you know it's coming from Brandon Aiyuk versus if it was Jaden's account, could have looked a little bit more believable. But it was Jaden saying, "Oh, what's going on, man? Like, what's happened?" And then Ayuk was like, "Oh, they don't want me back, man. I swear." and then that was it. It was a pretty short clip. But yeah, that's what happened, and then it just caused this whole stir. Oh my gosh, do the Niners really? Are they really saying that? Like, so what's up?
Well, of course, and it should spark that because it's the media, and they have to write any story that they possibly can in the off season, right? It's how they make
Yeah.
their money. But I want everybody to pump the brakes. Okay, I want everybody to think back 2 years ago to another wonderful wide receiver who kind of does it all, by the name of Deebo Samuel. Now, that contract negotiation was stressful, was riddled with anxiety, was frustrating. It got to the point where Deebo requested a trade from the 49ers. Like, it was messy, really messy, right? And unfortunately, I think Brandon took some kind of advice from maybe the situation that Deebo was in, or maybe Deebo himself, because this situation's eerily similar. We all know divas, or wide receivers are divas in a lot of ways. They demand a lot of money. They want the recognition when they feel they deserve the recognition. And if you give it to the quarterback, I will throw my quarterback under a bus type thing. Like give me mine. And so when it comes to a negotiation for a wide receiver and their money, these kind of things happen. Okay. Eagles have a wonderful front office, have wonderful mentality, receivers who have mentalities of wanting to just play, win now ball. And so they signed their contracts pretty early on.
Yeah.
And shout out to the organization, to the players for investing in this idea and in this plan. And obviously going for the Lombardi, right?
Right.
But the Niners do things a lot differently.
Cali
They
boys.
ultimately get to like the similar results. It might cost a little more because The way the Niners do things is just, it's a lot different. As far as this TikTok video that was posted, the fact that it wasn't from Brandon's point of view, it was, or rather from the other point of view, it was from Brandon's point of view. That leads me to believe, number one, that this is Brandon pushing this, right?
Yeah.
And not like if this was him having a FaceTime call with whoever, right? And some random fan sees it and screen records it and posts it. That's one thing. Like, that didn't happen. This was Brandon who posted that video, which means that Brandon is trying to get a message across. And ultimately, he's not getting a message across to the 49ers organization. He's getting across to the fans, who then put pressure on everybody else. And teams, management, and front offices, they don't fixate on fans or any of that yada yada. So I really kind of don't understand what the point of that video was. But it is definitely a grab at an idea. Like Brandon saying what was offered. The way I view this is Brandon saying they don't want me back. I know John Lynch didn't walk up to Brandon and say, we don't want you back.
Right.
Like, that just didn't happen. What he did was, the rumor is that the report was he offered him $26 million per year. And Brandon looked at that and said, that's disrespectful. I don't think that that's what I'm worth. I'm probably worth more.
Okay.
Therefore, y'all don't want me back.
Okay, so before we continue this level of discussion, let's kind of pivot to the market in general, because, and we have through Spot Rack, we have the average salary for the most recently paid receivers, or all the receivers, but we'll go through like the top 20 for what they make a year and what they were guaranteed. And we'll kind of look at this $26 million offer in a different way. But before we do that, Ben and I are going to go through our top 10 wide receivers right now in the NFL. Ben, would you like to go first? Or would you like me to go?
You go first.
Okay, so let me make sure I pull it up here so I don't forget. So I had, at number 1, I have Justin Jefferson from Minnesota. Then I got Jamar Chase from Cincinnati. A.J. Brown from Philly at 3. CeeDee Lamb at 4. Tyreek Hill at 5. Devontae Adams at 6. Cooper Kupp at 7. B.A. Brandon Aiyuk at 8. Devontae Smith at 9. And Amon-Ra St. Brown as my 10th. So I have Brandon right around like my 8th receiver mark, and I give him the slightest edge over Devontae, even though I'm wearing the jersey. I think Brandon just has the slightest edge on Devontae right now.
My list is eerily similar, and I do agree with that last bit. It's just a slight edge. But as far as, contract negotiations, that's a different story. But anyway, top 10 in order. Justin Jefferson's number 1. Then we go Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, Devontae Adams, Jamar Chase, A.J. Brown, Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, Brandon Aiyuk, and Devontae Smith. And obviously this is personal opinions. The reason I would put Stephon Diggs, I'm not getting into deep detail, but the reason I would put him up a little bit higher is because I feel like he was a vast majority of the success of the Bills, and it didn't actually have a lot to do with Josh Allen. But that's a whole nother story for a different time.
That's fair. That's a good list. And like for me, I considered kind of a little bit of injury history. Like for Tyreek Hill, I'm thinking this year maybe he's going to take a tiny step back and he's dealing with the hamstrings. Devontae Adams, same thing. Cooper Kupp was recovering from injury. Yeah. And I think with B.A., Devontae, and Amon-Ra St. Brown, they're like all in the same position to me, like young receivers who you can still build a team around, who are number 1 options. And Amon-Ra is for sure the number 1 in Detroit, but for Brandon Aiyuk and Devontae, they're both in this whole wide receiver 1A, right, wide receiver 1B scenario. So on their own separate teams, I believe they're top 10 receivers. So
yeah, and I fully agree with that. So obviously $26 million was what was offered to Brandon Aiyuk reportedly
so
as the first number. So let's compare similar contracts and where we rank our guys at.
All right. So yes, this is from Spot Rack, and they track salaries, cap hits, all contract negotiation styles, and the averages. This site has it all. So what we're going to be mainly looking at is going to be contract average per year. And we'll go through the top 20 real quick. And then we'll do the amount that they were guaranteed at signing. So when we look here at these top 10, like, this is just the market exploding this year. In terms of who got signed this year, Justin Jefferson, AJ, Amon-Ra, Jalen Waddle got signed, Devontae, Nico Collins. These guys were the ones on the top 10 that just got paid. And this is all before CeeDee Lamb. This is all before Brandon Aiyuk and Jamar Chase as well. So Justin Jefferson completely reset the market. I don't know if there was anything that surprised you looking at this list, Ben.
To be honest with you, no. Nothing really stands out to me. The only thing that I would say is, based on where we both have Brandon Aiyuk, $26 million doesn't seem like it's that far off.
Mm-hmm.
So where's the disconnect?
So I guess the question is, we look at a guy like Jalen Waddle or even Amon-Ra, right? How much better do you think they are to Brandon Aiyuk, or do you think Brandon is a better player than one or both of them?
I think Brandon's a better player than Amon-Ra.
So then we get this opinion, right? So I believe Brandon Aiyuk thinks the same thing, right? So the question is, when we had our list, we had Devontae Smith right there with him as well. And Devontae took a pay cut. Well, not a pay cut, but he could have asked for more money, but he took the $25 million and he said, I'm not worried about anybody else. I'm worried about, I still have generational money and I can still improve later on. So it's interesting when you have a guy who takes that approach, and then you got a guy like Brandon Aiyuk who has just kind of been in the doghouse for most of his career. Even still with like the number of targets he gets, it just makes me wonder like what he could do with more. And I think when he gets more, he could be in that Amon-Ra range in terms of production, because they were both right there with each other last year.
Yeah, and that's been the argument the whole time. I mean, I talked about it last year, how his touches, his targets are just, they're not even close to some of these top guys, and yet he still hit 1,300 yards. And like, that is insane. It's like, what would you do with the same amount of targets?
Right.
But then you also think about, well, if you had that many targets, well, defenses would start playing you differently, and you might not have that kind of, efficiency. And like, on out routes, Brandon Aiyuk was number one in the league in efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
On in routes, Deebo Samuel was number one in the league. But it's a product of the fact that they don't throw the football nearly as many times as some of these other top receiving cores in the league.
Exactly.
And so, like, we talk about how the Niners operate, like, essentially their best offense is running the ball, getting the ground game going, and then developing the air game. So it's tough. This is a tough situation for the Niners because they've never used Brandon Aiyuk as a wide receiver one, even last year, which was his best year. And I feel a vast majority of NFL fans or in media feel that Brandon is a wide receiver one option on damn near any team in the league. And he could probably get that kind of money. However, you haven't been targeted that many times. You haven't been getting that wide receiver one role yet. And so it's, I want to say, a shot in the dark for the Niners to offer you that much money when you haven't proven it. But it's tough because the Niners really kind of put themselves in this position, and now they've got to come to some kind of agreement with Brandon. Otherwise, it could get really messy.
Yeah, and I also think when you look at these contracts, even if the Niners offered him at $28 million, I wonder if he thinks he's worth more. And it's crazy when last year was kind of the breakout year for him, because when you look at the past two seasons, in reality, he's more the 11 to 15 range of wide receivers. So the question would be, are they banking on him to continue to improve, or has he maybe reached a peak for San Fran in their system? So that's something that I think might be weighing into the decision as well.
Yeah, and it's also a tough say right now because Purdy's only really gotten one full year under his belt,
Yeah.
and the dude's only going to get better. I don't believe that he's hit his ceiling yet, because he hasn't even gotten an offseason to just work on himself up until
Mm-hmm.
this year. And so, like, there's so many different sides to this,
Right.
sides of the coin, where I I look at it and I'm like, 26 mil, take it right now. Because that's still damn good money for the fact that you haven't been targeted nearly as, like, as technically a wide receiver too. There's not a wide receiver two close to here that
Mm-hmm.
is getting the kind of money as you.
Right.
But at the same time, you understand that, like, everybody knows if Brandon signs a 4 year here in San Francisco, he
Mm-hmm.
will be wide receiver one. And that's almost as clear as can be. If he signs here again, Debo will maybe be wide receiver one more year. And then his role is going to completely shift.
Yeah.
And he's going to be more a decoy. And then it's going to be more Brandon, because we already kind of saw it this year. It just wasn't set in stone, but we saw those hints. And
Mm-hmm.
so to make that kind of money as still a wide receiver two is an awesome opportunity. And you get to potentially, you get to step into a wide receiver one position in at least 2 years.
Yeah.
And then, like, you're getting, then you're like, okay, well, how do I add up to these guys? Well, Devontae Adams has gotten at least 2 major contracts in his career.
Yes.
So you still have room to get one more major, contract in your career, so long as everything goes the way it's supposed to.
Right.
So it's kind of a battle of, obviously, it's a battle of what Brandon wants now. And if he's willing to settle and, prove it in the next 4 years, and then take a massive extension going, to his second contract. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's all risk reward. It's all banking on the future working out
Yeah.
exactly how it is, because these guys, Justin Jefferson signed for 35 mil, but he was hurt for the second half of last season. So it's like that's the risk you take, and you're still gambling on just how good he can be as well as how good they are now. So it'll be interesting. And not only, we see the 26 million a year, right? But then another, that sways players would be just how much they make at a guaranteed level. And you see when you get to the guaranteed portion of it that the list kind of switches around a little bit, right? So you got Justin Jefferson at 1, Tyreek Hill at 2, AJ Brown at 3, Calvin Ridley at 4, DJ Moore at 5, Debo at 6, Jerry Jeudy at 7, Michael Pittman Jr. 8th, Amari Cooper 9th, and Chris Godwin at 10th. And then Devontae was top 8, Cooper Kupp was top 8, Amon-Ra is 16th and guaranteed, even though he has the third highest annual contract. So it's like, I wonder with the 26 million, what guarantee limit were they also suggesting for Aiyuk as well? So that'll be the interesting dynamic too.
Yeah, and obviously I don't think any of that detail has been released, and if we'll see it, that's up to be determined. But guaranteed money is massive. I mean, it has a massive weight on contracts. I just, like, if I'm the 49ers right now, I think your max for Brandon that you should be dishing out to him, I say he should take 26. I think 28.5 is probably the most that I would pay for Brandon.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just based on everything I've seen from the absolute dog in him. That's based on all the contracts around him. It's tough, man, because as the 49ers organization, you want to keep as many of these superstar players as you can. And you've got a plethora of them right now. You've also got massive deals. You only have one player guaranteed in 2028 right now, and that's Nick Bosa.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's a lot of massive contracts that will either be shed or to be, determined in the coming 3 years. And that's something that they have to focus on, especially considering they still haven't won a freaking championship. Like,
exactly.
If y'all won the Super Bowl last year like you were supposed to, this situation would be a little bit different and would probably be playing out differently too, because it might very well be a situation where it's like, how much do you want, Brandon? Because you are very much a part of our growth and our team going forward. So how much do you want? Because you are a part of the plan. That
Mm-hmm.
is where the Niners are at right now. It fully is. I know that.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of, look, we're fully invested in you, man, but we fully invested in this team too. And you also haven't gotten us the championship because you keep running into the Patrick Mahomes wall. So, we can't just throw everything at you right now. We have to still build this team and continue to work on this team because it's not the best it can be yet. It's tough.
Yeah, and I think 28-5 is good for him too. And I wonder that, if he just takes like a top 5 guaranteed, it puts him ahead of Debo, and DJ Moore, and they could probably do it around the Ridley range. But again, it is up to the Niners and what their financial situation is, because again, there are a lot of factors, especially for BA, that the Niners do have to consider. Like mentioned, like Brock Purdy, he's Trevor Lawrence just reset the market at 275 million dollars. But Brock Purdy's going to come up next, and if he plays anywhere near like he did this season, where they make it a deep run in the playoffs, everything like that, he's going to make $300 million and $150 million guaranteed. That's money that needs to be set aside for this guy. And on top of that, prior to, like, during when this was all going on, the Niners also re-signed CMC, correct? So now he's the highest paid running back. They extended it for 2 more years. And then there was another report of Trent Williams needing a contract or wanting a restructure on his contract too, right? So it's like your best players who are aging also want money too. And there's a lot going on that the Niners have to juggle. And I think that so much focuses on the hurry up, do it now aspect of it, when in reality, they're trying to find how they can do this and without crippling themselves and giving themselves a window that just shuts because they can't pay everybody.
No, absolutely. And yeah, I think what's frustrating is just how many times we see the 49ers do this dance with the contract negotiations.
Yeah.
There's one thing I do have to say about this whole BA situation, and that's that I do also believe, like I just said, I believe that the 49ers want him long term. And I do believe that they're going to get a deal done. However, I can't sit here and say that there's a situation where BA just doesn't want to take that and then plays his last year and gone.
Right.
Like there or trade him and that's it. You know what I mean? Like and the reason I say that is because look at who we drafted. Look at who we just re-signed in Juwan Jennings. Like they're still working on the wide receiver room. So there's very much a plan B in place. Whether it's a great plan B or not, that's to be determined. Because obviously a plan B is a plan B. You hope you don't fall back on that. But there's something there just in case. And that's, I can't sit here and say that the 49ers will be just fine without Brandon Aiyuk. But I still think the Niners are a playoff team.
For sure.
And probably a contender. But that offense would change. Because how much I was advocating for, let Purdy drop back and sling it, like that probably shifts mentally for me, knowing that such an elite route runner in the NFL is no longer on your team. That's been major for Purdy in his development as a young quarterback. To have somebody who can, he can rely on to run a perfect route, to snap ankles and get wide open in the middle or the outside of the field for bombs, dude, that's all you can ask for as a young quarterback working on getting yours. So I really think the 49ers are going to get a deal done, but I don't know when it's going to be.
Right.
Knowing their history with them, it's probably not going to be anytime soon. It's probably going to be a month or two. But what it looks like, I'm thinking the 28-5 range.
Okay. No, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. And it is a matter of how important they view BA too, because Ricky could be a good replacement, but then again, who knows for sure. And he was a huge part of Purdy's development too. I agree with that
Yeah.
100% because he was the reason Brock Purdy had those 20+ yard throw numbers was because BA was the one he was throwing to consistently. So it'll be interesting to see.
100%.
So any more news from the Niners outside of, the CMC signing, his Madden cover, anything like that you want to go through?
That's it. The Madden curse is a joke. I don't know if it's a joke, but no, I mean, Patty, I was looking back on it and I was actually talking to my girlfriend about it because she was like, calm down about the curse. Like, you don't need to freak out about it. And I'm like, no, this is a problem. And she's like, no. And she like gave me all these reasons why it's not. And I was like, oh yeah, you're right. Like Patty Mahomes was on the cover and like he still went back to the Super Bowl and still won it. Like, it's Josh Allen was on the cover last year and yeah, he had a down year, but he didn't have massively low numbers. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't anything. I'm not super worried. And honestly, for CMC, shout out to him. This was a dream for him. Not only is he on the cover of the game he's always wanted to be on, but he's on the cover as a 49er. And that's cool for him. And it's cool for everybody.
Yeah, that's great. All right. So I guess we'll transition on here to some Eagles news. So far in Eagles camp, OTAs, I think the most important thing was obviously we spent our first 2 picks this year on our 2 cornerbacks to address what was the most glaring need defensively was our corner situation. And from early on, and obviously this is, everyone's in shorts or it's not, real contact yet, but I think the Eagles actually have a super deep corner room now. And part of that was aided by that by the other player, Isaiah Rodgers, who was suspended from the league last year for gambling in Indianapolis. And then the Eagles just signed him, knowing that he wouldn't be active until this season. And he's been a really impressive name in so far. Him, Keely Ringo have mainly been the ones lining outside of Slay. And, I wonder how much playing time Quinyon Mitchell is going to really get because the Eagles do like to kind of pace their new corners, especially when we have the level of talent that we do. But I know they're still going to find a place to get him in there. And they have a deep rotation now that can recover from injuries. And now it's almost like the best part of our defense. And Devin White looks like he's fitting in good. All the young pieces are improving. It's a big Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis year. Like a lot of this team, both offensively and defensively, is banking a lot on potentially the big boom or a terrible bust because things don't go the way we plan. But offensively, we've installed both coordinators. So Vic Fangio for the defense, and they said that he's been doing a lot of good things, and that's good to hear early on. And obviously the Eagles signed Kellen Moore to be their offensive coordinator to call plays. And the big debate going into it was, is Nick Sirianni being the CEO head coach, how much of it is still his offense? Well, they asked Jalen Hurts, and Jalen Hurts said it's basically a 95% different, that offense that he's learning. So it's involving a lot of style, which the Eagles fans have been asking for, some freaking motion, some disguise on plays, and a short game and answer to the blitz. And Kellen Moore is bringing all of that, and it looks really promising. And the receivers have a lot of good praise for Kellen's offense, saying we have more freedom of choice, freedom of decisions for option routes and things of that nature. So the guys are liking it so far. With so much to learn on the offense, even though we have the skill players, it's still a whole process to learn a whole new offense in such a short time. So the offense has been a little bit behind the defense. But it looks like we're in position if everything goes well where we're going to be able to rebound pretty well from some of the issues that we had last year. And Jalen and Saquon have worked with each other off the field by themselves for multiple times now. So they're really developing a bond, which is really good to see.
Yeah, and I mean, based on the end of last year, and then obviously the losses in some of the players this offseason, you guys are in a good spot. And some of the things obviously coming out, and obviously the things you talk about, it's setting you up for a good start to the year. But I am curious, do you think, and this is just your honest opinion take from an outside perspective, do you think Jalen Hurts likes Nick Sirianni?
So the reason Ben is asking me this question is because it was reported it was after a mini camp practice And Jalen said some frankly surprising so he answered a question about Nick Sirianni in a very surprising way. And the whole Philly media is freaking out about it. So they essentially asked Jalen, and I'm paraphrasing, so I'll do my best here. They essentially asked Jalen, they're like, hey, how has Nick Sirianni been handling the change? Um, does it show his leadership? Has he been doing a good job adjusting to the new role with everything that's going on? And Jalen said, that's a good question. I don't know how to answer it with that length of a pause.
Yeah.
And then he paused again for like 4 more seconds. And the more you listen to the actual audio, the kind of more awkward it sounds. And like they even asked him again, they're like, has it, learning the new offense, has he still been able to get his message across? And Jalen still took time to pause, and he's like, I think he's doing a good job, like relaying his message and keeping us organized. But there was no glowing review like, hey, yeah, no, he's doing a great job handling it well. We're loving everything that we've done so far. Like, it's literally like the easiest question he could have gotten, and he answered it horribly. Makes people wonder if Jalen and Nick actually get along. And that's a little scary. Like, so if I had to put a panic scale 1 to 10, like how you did with the BA contract, I'm going to sit more like a 4, because while I do feel like there is a level of validity to this, I don't think Jalen cares enough one way or the other about Sirianni. I think it's different. I don't think he doesn't like him. I don't think that he loves him either. There hasn't been that kind of connection that you see from most player coaches. Jalen is more of like, how do I describe it? He's more of the lead by example team player. Like, he's going to talk to his teammates type of guy.
Yeah.
Versus the head coach is like, I'm just going to hype everyone else up, but I don't even need to hype up my quarterback. He knows he does it his own way. I just don't think their personalities mesh perfectly. But that doesn't mean that they don't get along or that Jalen isn't a good soldier and isn't tolerating things. But this isn't the first time in the past 6 months where he had the opportunity to defend Nick Sirianni and reply in a, even a fake way. And that was after the playoff loss to Tampa Bay. He's just like, oh, whatever happens next happens next. With Sirianni, he didn't say like, oh, he's a great coach, keep him, none of that. So,
but on that note, like, Hurts isn't the kind of guy to come out and give you some BS at the podium. Like,
yeah,
he's always been the guy who's like, I'm not gonna say he wears his emotions on his sleeve, but he wears his responses on his sleeve. Like what he's feeling is kind of what he's gonna tell you. And
yeah.
even if he doesn't necessarily say it in the words, you read it in the room. And that's the part of it. Like, that's the reason I ask you, is because I did watch that video, and I watched it a couple times, because the first time I was like, this is weird. And I watched it the second time, and I'm like, no, there's something here. And I don't think it's something to be super concerned about. Like, a 4 or 5 is probably a good number to sit at on the scale, but it's something especially to look at when and if the Eagles go through a slump of any kind again, similar to what happened last year. Because at the end of last year, we saw a lot of emotions come out from the Eagles, like from the players, from the coaches, from the organization, from obviously the fans. Like, that's not an easy fan base to play in front of. That's not an easy city to play in. And I'm curious to see what would happen if a scenario played out where the Eagles go on a slump and things just don't look good.
And the scary part about this is that there's a legit possibility it could happen early, with both, the offense and the defense getting overhauled again. It'll be interesting to see how they handle, the pressure and how they handle obstacles this time around, because normally we've seen this team in both kind of ways. They started off extremely poor and were able to rally and make something better out of it. That was the whole Nick Sirianni Flowers, press conference that, went viral. But after that, the Eagles went on this insane run, and that included prior up to the 10-1 start from last year. And it just kind of fell apart, and there was a lot of things outside of just Nick, outside of just Jalen, that could happen, but that was a problem. And the Eagles also believed that it was, by their actions, that it was the coordinators that were the problem. It was the lack of cohesion there, and Nick is a good enough leader of these guys. But the problem is when your $50 million quarterback who you're married to right now is saying things that are lukewarm and not really as supportive as you would normally see from, like, if you hear a guy like Brock Purdy, he's talking glowingly about Kyle Shanahan, and Nick Sirianni will go to bat for Jalen and his guys all the time. Like that Seattle loss that we had when Drew Lock went the whole distance on us, Nick Sirianni took the blame for Jalen and AJ's mistake for weeks, and AJ was the one who ended up saying that Nick Sirianni took the fall for us. And there are qualities in Jalen where you think like, whoa, like, a true leader would have stepped up in that situation and kind of just admitted it at that time. So it does worry me a little bit, but I do believe that Jalen is a gamer and that he does love and have a passion for the game enough where he pushes that aside. And just tries to go out there and play the best that he can. I don't think he lets it bother him in game. But it is something that if he wants that level of attention off of him, because responding that way, it would disappoint me as a fan, which kind of did a little bit, because that's something you don't want to normally hear, even if it's not the biggest deal. And not only does it mess up the fans a little bit, it messes up the front office, who went publicly. They could have gotten another coach and had a different conversation, but they publicly defended their decision, and their quarterback, their franchise guy, doesn't seem like he's on the same level as these guys in terms of how they feel about Nick. So that is scary, and that's something that we will have to manage, because his childhood coach, Brian Johnson, who's forever got fired, and now he's learning this entire new offense. So that could be, part of the frustration. But I think Jalen's going to be up for the challenge, and this will make him better. But it's just that is one thing to keep an eye on. And Jalen's not necessarily that safe either. Like, Nick Sirianni has the hotter seat, but if Jalen has another lackluster year, because he's good enough to where even if there's a few growing pains, you should be, with these weapons, living up to a standard that's top of the league type of stuff. So if Jalen isn't performing or holding up his end of the bargain, next year is a different conversation for what we're having to start the season. So
yeah, I think that's a really safe analysis, honestly. I asked you a while ago if you backed Hurts or Sirianni more, and you told me it was Hurts. Is that still your stance?
Yeah,
Okay.
I trust Hurts more than I trust Sirianni. I love Sirianni. I don't hate him the way everyone else does, in the sense of, like, I think he's a good coach. I don't think he's overrated. I think he's a good leader of men, and guys support him. But I do wish that, I had a technical guru on my team that would, that'd be more fun than have to worry about our coach who's like the emotional, dramatic leader who draws attention to himself type thing. But he's made crucial decisions that have worked out in our favor and that haven't worked out. But he's been a more consistent coach, and his record would suggest that he has been better than the perception of him is, in my opinion. So I think you can win with Sirianni, and he's shown that you can win with him as well. It'll just be a matter of, we moved into that territory where, like, if Kyle Shanahan struggles with his, like, for example, like for the Niners, if Kyle Shanahan struggles to develop a legit game plan and succeed with the weapons that he has, when you see Sirianni, he's in the same boat. There's Howie Roseman did his job, got him loaded with all these weapons. If you can't execute with all these weapons and the money that was invested into them, that's a waste. And your seat naturally just gets warmer that way. You have to succeed. So
yeah, I think Kyle's got a similar position, not nearly as I guess as hot as Sirianni's is, but if Kyle has a bad year this year, I'm talking missed playoffs, I think he's done.
Belichick.
Like, I'm not ready to take on Belichick yet either. But it's hard to say too, because Kyle's now essentially built this offense. The offense has been top, I'll say 5 for a long time now.
Yeah.
And without Kyle, I don't see that happening. And the reason being is Kyle is 110% a offensive masterminded head coach. but he does struggle with full game calling sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the risks that we would want him to take, he doesn't actually take. So I believe that he's kind of on a hot seat in some regards too. It's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be an interesting year.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're months out from it. A lot's gonna happen. But in terms of Eagles stuff, you got anything else?
No, honestly, I'm liking the way we're looking, and I like the fact that it seems to be just kind of like an identity switch. Um, the fact that the young guys are making such an impact is it's extremely promising to me. Um, and I know that especially Cooper DeJean, he could end up starting in the slot game one, and he's proving to be worth the pick as well. So I'm just happy to see that we've been able to hit on a couple of these guys. And again, it's still so early, but to see guys like Keely Ringo play well too, it's just bringing me a lot more confidence. And like you said, a lot is going to happen, and some moves have yet to be made. And it'll be interesting to see just how different these systems look next year.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, so I think we'll call it there for today. So that was episode 47 of the Behind the Back podcast. You can hit us up at behindthebackpod13@gmail.com. Hit us up on any of our social medias: Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, X, all that fun jazz, Facebook. We're posting more videos on different platforms now to just expand our reach a little bit, so you'll catch our clips there as well. And please hit us up, like, rate, review the show, give us a follow, all that fun jazz. We love it, and we appreciate all the support we get.
Yes, and we finally made it through both seasons with you guys. So for everybody who's stuck around with us through both seasons, we appreciate you. We love you. For anybody who's recently joined us, welcome. It's gonna be a fun ride. This off season's there's gonna be things to talk about all off season long. We're not gonna be grinding for content, anything crazy like that. There's always things to talk about, especially with the Niners, especially with the Eagles, and especially with the Sacramento Kings.
Yep.
So lots of things to come, guys. So stay tuned.
All right. Well, I'm Marcos Conagron. Beside me here, as always, is
Ben the Jet.
All right, y'all. We'll talk to you next week about the draft. Let's get it. All right. Peace.
Peace.